Bennett Ashford, the youngest senator elected in the province's history and the man whose name had appeared on the shortlist for federal cabinet twice in 3 years, found his missing wife behind a Tim Hortons counter in a town called Stillwater, Ontario, handing a double-double to a man in a snow-dusted parka, and what she said when she looked up was the one sentence in the world that could stop a man mid-breath. He had been driving since 4 in the morning. The constituency dinner in Kingston had run long and his aide had taken the wheel through the worst of the 4:01 traffic, but somewhere past Napanee, Bennett had asked to switch. He always drove when he couldn't sleep. Driving was the one place where he didn't have to perform stillness. The highway had thinned out by 5:30. The sky was the particular grey of a February morning that hasn't decided yet whether it will snow. He took an exit he didn't know the name of because the sign said coffee, and coffee was the only word in his head. The town was called Stillwater. He had never heard of Stillwater, but it had the look of every small Ontario town he had passed through in 20 years of campaigning: a Legion Hall with a vinyl banner, a feed and seed with the lights still off, a dollar store, a pharmacy, and at the end of the main block a Tim Hortons with its warm orange glow against the dark, and a parking lot with 3 trucks in it. He pulled in. He had been a husband for 14 months. He had been a husband without a wife for 19 months. He pushed open the door. The smell of coffee and old fryer oil and something sweetly industrial folded around him. A man in a heavy plaid jacket was filling a travel mug at the counter. A teenager in a visor was restocking the pastry case. Behind the front till in a uniform the colour of bark, with her hair pulled back tight under a cap, her hands already moving toward the next cup before the order was finished, was his wife. Wren Ashford, who had a law degree from Osgoode, who had clerked for a judge in Ottawa for 2 years, who had spent 4 months campaigning door-to-door in Renfrew County in the sleet so he could win a seat no one thought he could win. She had cut her hair. It was very short now, close to the head, and it made her look younger and also somehow older. Like a woman who had made a deliberate decision about what she was willing to carry on her, she had lost weight. The line of her collarbone showed above the collar of the uniform. Her hands moved with the specific economy of someone who has done a thing 10,000 times. She looked up. For a long second, the Tim Hortons breathed around them. The teenager closed the pastry case. The man in plaid zipped his travel mug and walked out. The fryer somewhere in the back ticked on. She did not drop the cup. She set it down on the counter with the same deliberate care she would have used, setting a court document in front of a judge. She looked at him. You weren't supposed to find me yet, she said. He stood with his hand still on the door handle. The cold outside pressed against his back. He did not know what he had prepared for. He had prepared for everything. He had prepared for grief and for anger and for a stranger, and for a woman who no longer looked like herself. He had not prepared for yet. 19 months earlier, Bennett Ashford had stood in the kitchen of their house in Ottawa on a Tuesday morning in July, and read a single piece of notepaper left between his coffee cup and the fruit bowl, held flat by the weight of her wedding ring. The note said, "I'm so sorry, please don't look. Please trust me, I love you, Wren." He had read it standing up. He had read it again sitting down at the kitchen table. He had called her cell voicemail. He had called her office. She had not come in that morning. He had called her closest friend, a woman named Delia Ford, who worked at a firm in the Glebe, who said she hadn't spoken to Wren in 3 days and whose voice had a careful blankness to it that told him Delia knew something and was not going to say it. He had called his chief of staff. He had told her that a family matter had come up and that he would not be taking calls before noon. He had sat in the kitchen until 10. Then he had stood up and done what he always did. He had gone to work. He had told his communications director that Wren had returned to British Columbia temporarily to care for an ailing aunt. He had told his mother the same. He had told the press nothing, and when the press eventually asked, he said only that his wife was managing a private family matter and that he appreciated the public's respect for their privacy. He had hired a private investigator 3 weeks after she left. The investigator had come back 6 weeks after that with nothing except a record of a cash withdrawal from a branch in Oshawa on the morning she had left and an exit from an underground parking garage on foot without a vehicle. Wren Ashford had, on the morning she walked out of their house in Ottawa, become a person who did not exist on paper. He had fired the investigator. He had hired 2 more. He had spent 8 months paying people to find her. He had attended 6 campaign events, 3 committee hearings, and 1 federal pre-budget consultation. He had given a speech at a veterans' hall in his riding that people called the best of his career. He had accepted a community award on behalf of a food bank he had helped fund. He had come home every single night to a house that still smelled faintly of her because he had told the cleaner not to change the detergent she used on the sheets. After the first year, the best investigator he had hired, A woman named Garretson, who had 20 years in federal policing before she went private, had driven to Ottawa and sat in his kitchen and looked at him across the table and said, very quietly, "Mr. Ashford, she is alive, she is safe. She is not being held by anyone, and she is not in any immediate danger. She has chosen this. She is very good at it. But I cannot find a person who is this good at not being found unless they choose to let themselves be found. I'm sorry." She had returned the retainer he hadn't asked her to return. She had driven away. But he had stood in the driveway for a long time in the October dark. And now, 19 months after the Tuesday morning in July, in a Tim Hortons in Stillwater, Ontario, at 5:45 in the morning, his wife had set a coffee cup down very carefully and said, "You weren't supposed to find me yet." "But I was on the highway," he said. His voice did not sound like his voice. "I needed coffee." "But," she looked at him for another moment. "But, all right," she said. "But, Wren." "But all right," she said again, quieter. But the teenager at the pastry case had gone very still, and then very deliberately turned her back and begun rearranging things that did not need rearranging. But there was a redness along the knuckles of Wren's right hand, the kind that came from cold water and repetitive motion. He noticed it the way a person notices a crack in a wall they have been staring at, suddenly and all at once, and unable to stop seeing it. "But, I'm not going to ask you anything," he said. "Not here. I need you to know that I'm not leaving." "But," she closed her eyes briefly. "But, I'm on until 8, she said. "But, I'll wait." "But, Bennett." "But, I'll wait outside. I'll wait in the parking lot. I'll wait in the truck." But, she opened her eyes. They were the color he remembered. She had a look in them that he hadn't seen when they were married, or maybe hadn't recognized. A look that was made of something quiet and very old, the look of a person who has been carrying weight for a long time and has organized herself around it. "But, there's a booth at the back," she said, "by the window. Nobody sits there this early." But, he walked to the booth. But, he ordered coffee when the teenager came over. "The girl's name tag," said Brianna, and she did not look at him directly, which meant she had almost certainly recognized him and was performing the great Canadian art of polite non-acknowledgement. He thanked her. He put his hands around the cup. But, he watched his wife work. But, she moved through the small space behind the counter, the way a person moves through a room they have navigated in the dark enough times to know where every corner falls. She knew the machine. She knew the flow. A man in a Hydro One jacket came in, and she had his order ready before he finished saying medium. But, a woman came in with 2 kids in snowsuits, and Wren crouched slightly to be at eye level with the smaller one, and said something that made the child laugh, and handed her a Timbits bag directly, and the mother gave Wren a look that had a whole small friendship in it. But she belonged to this counter. She knew these people. But she did not look at Bennett once. But he looked at nothing else. But at 8:05, she came around the counter in her coat, the uniform replaced by a dark green parka and jeans and the flat-soled boots she had always worn in winter, the ones he had teased her about because they did nothing for cold weather, and she had defended them every year anyway. She stopped at the end of his booth. "But, I'm renting a room," she said. "It's above the pharmacy 3 buildings down. I walk to work because the road gets bad, and it's not far. You can walk with me if you want." She looked at the window. The sky had begun to lighten at the far edge, a thin line of pewter going pale. "I'm going to make tea. There isn't much else. But we can talk." But he stood up. He left money on the table. He held the door for her. But they walked 3 buildings down a sidewalk that had been shoveled but was icing over again at the edges. She put her hand on the railing of a metal staircase at the side of the pharmacy and climbed. He followed. But the room was one room with a kitchenette along one wall and a window that faced the street. There was a single bed made with the particular neatness of someone who makes it as a daily act of self-preservation. A bookshelf with a row of paperbacks, mostly legal texts he noticed, and a few novels. A small table with 2 chairs. A kettle, no television, no laptop. But a single photograph on the windowsill of her father's fishing cabin in the Kootenays, the one he had been to twice when they were still dating, and that she had loved so much she'd cried driving away from it the second time. But there was no photograph of him. But she filled the kettle. She told him to sit down. But he sat. But she came out of the small bathroom in a different sweater, a grey one with her coat still on but unzipped, and made tea in 2 mugs that didn't match. She set one in front of him. She sat across the table with her hands around her own mug and her knees drawn up to the chair in the way she had always sat when she was thinking hard about something. "But ask me what you want to ask me," she said. "Except there is one thing I cannot tell you tonight. I will tell you. I promise I will. But not yet. Everything else I will answer." "But why did you leave?" But her hands tightened around the mug. "But that's the one thing." "But Wren." "But that's the one thing I cannot tell you yet. I'm sorry. I know what it costs. Ask me something else." But he looked at her for a long time. "But tell me where you've been." She breathed in, she breathed out. I left Ottawa the morning I left you, she said. I took a bus to Oshawa. I worked at a grocery store there for 6 weeks under my mother's maiden name. Sorrel, just the given name, no surname on the forms. The manager was a kind man who didn't ask twice. After Oshawa, I spent 2 months in Barrie staying at a women's support residence, not in crisis. They had short-term rooms for women who needed to be somewhere safe and quiet while they figured out what came next. I helped in their intake office while I was there. Then I came here. She looked down at her tea. Stillwater. I came here because I passed through it once on a drive north with my father when I was 12, and I remembered it had a hardware store and a library and a Tim Hortons and not much else. I thought nobody would think of it. Nobody did, he said quietly. She nodded once. I have been here for just over a year, she said. I work mornings at the Tim Hortons. I have been helping the librarian, Mrs. Breckett, catalogue a donated legal archive on Tuesday afternoons because she had no one who could read the materials. I have not been in contact with anyone from my previous life. I have not used a smartphone. I have not been online. I am not in contact with Delia. I am not in contact with my brother. She paused. I have not been with anyone. I have not spent a cent of our joint money. I have a pay stub account at the credit union on Clement Street with $2,011 in it. That is all I have. She looked up. I have thought about you every day. He set his mug down on the table. You said yet, he said after a moment. You said I wasn't supposed to find you yet. Yes. Which means there is a when. Yes. How far away? She looked at him carefully, the way she used to look at a brief before she committed to an argument. 8 weeks, she said. I need 8 more weeks. And at the end of 8 weeks? At the end of 8 weeks, I was going to find a way to reach you. I had not completely decided how, but I was going to be ready by then. I was going to have done what I needed to do. She stopped. I didn't know if you would still want me. I was hoping. I told myself you might have moved on. I told myself that would be fair, but I was hoping you hadn't. He stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He looked down at the empty street. The pharmacy sign still lit from the night. The pharmacist's car, the only one in the back lot, the hardware store across the way beginning to show light at the edge of its roll-down. He looked at the line of the horizon where the sun was coming up flat and pale behind the cloud cover. I am not going to ask you to come back, he said. He kept his voice level. I'm not going to ask you anything tonight that you're not ready to answer. He turned around. But I am going to stay. She looked at him. I'm going to find a place to rent in this town, he said. I'm going to call Marcus and tell him I'm taking a leave. He has been asking me to take a leave for 8 months. I'm going to tell the office I am dealing with a personal matter and I will check in when I need to. I'm going to be here in Stillwater in the same town as you. I'm not going to come to your door. I'm not going to make demands. I'm going to be a man who is staying in town for a while. And at the end of 8 weeks you are going to do whatever it is you need to do. And I will be somewhere you can find me. She was quiet for a long time. You have a constituency, she said. I have a staff. You have committee obligations. I have a phone and a hotel room and 19 months of favors I have never called in. I'll manage it. Bennett. I'm going to stay, Wren. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted. Not relief entirely, something more complicated than relief. Something that had grief in it and something that looked, underneath the grief, like the first breath a person takes when they have been holding their breath for a very long time. There's a bed and breakfast at the end of Clement, she said finally. Mrs. Quennell runs it. She rents by the week. She will ask what you do, and you should tell her you're a writer on deadline, because she has opinions about politicians. Her son works the snow removal contract for the county, and she is very proud of him and will tell you so within 5 minutes. He almost smiled. Don't sit at the front table by the window at the Tim Hortons, she said. That's Gus's table. He's 83, and he has been sitting there since the location opened, and he will be polite about it, but it will bother him. She paused. Don't tip more than 15%. Brianna is saving for nursing school, and she keeps track, and it makes her uncomfortable when people tip too much. She thinks it's condescension. All right. Don't come to the library on Tuesday afternoons. All right. Mrs. Breckett doesn't know who I am, and I'd like to keep it that way for the next 8 weeks. I understand. And don't. She stopped herself. She pressed her lips together. She looked down at the table. What? Don't do things that make it hard for me to finish, she said. I need to be able to think clearly for 8 more weeks. If you do things that make it hard to think, I won't be able to do what I have to do. He nodded. He walked to the door of the apartment. He put his hand on the door frame. He turned back. Wren. Yes. I have not moved out of the bedroom, he said. Your things are where you left them. I had to take your coat off the hook because I kept reaching for it by accident, but everything else I left. She closed her eyes. Please, she said, and her voice was very quiet. Please don't tell me things like that right now, I can't. She stopped. 8 weeks, please. I'm sorry, he said, all right. He walked down the metal stair. He walked the length of Clement Street to the bed and breakfast at the end. Mrs. Quennell came to the door in a housecoat and did not seem surprised. He told her his name was Ben Lewis and he was working on a book. She showed him to a room at the back with a view of the yard and a single pine tree and the edge of the frozen creek behind the property. He paid cash for 2 weeks. She told him her son ran the snow removal contract for the county. He said that was a good service to provide. She seemed satisfied. He sat on the edge of the bed in his coat for an hour. Then he lay down and he slept. He woke at noon. He drove 30 kilometers to a Canadian Tire in the next town and bought 2 pairs of jeans, 3 flannel shirts, a heavier work jacket, a wool hat, and a package of basic toiletries. He bought a cheap prepaid phone for emergencies and powered his real one down. He drove back and parked on Clement and went into the hardware store to have a reason to be there and bought a box of screws he didn't need and learned the name of the man behind the counter, who was called Roger Maitland, and who had run the hardware store since his father's time, and whose retriever slept under the counter and was named Corporal. He ate at the Tim Hortons at 5 o'clock and ordered the soup of the day, which was chicken and vegetable, and read the local weekly paper and learned that the town had voted on a new arena roof in November, and that the high school girls' hockey team had placed 3rd in the regional playoffs. Wren was not on shift. He tipped 14%. He walked back to Mrs. Quennell's. He did this for 4 days. On the 5th day, he began to understand Stillwater. He learned that Gus, whose full name was Gus Halverson, came in every morning at 7:45 and ordered a small dark roast with 1 sugar and a plain bagel, untoasted, and read the same regional paper in a different order than Bennett did, starting from the back. He learned that the pharmacist, a quiet woman named Dr. Mirani, had been the only pharmacist in the county for 11 years and that people drove in from 3 towns over for her. He learned that the priest at St. Andrews had played junior hockey in the 80s and still refereed minor atom games on Saturday mornings. He learned slowly over the course of 4 mornings of careful observation what the Tim Hortons meant to this town. It was not a coffee shop. It was where Gus Halverson was not alone. It was where the woman with the 2 kids in snowsuits could sit with her children somewhere warm that was not her house. It was where Brianna, at 19, had a counter she ran with precision and pride. And he learned that Wren was known here, quietly, the way a person becomes known in a small town when they are not trying to be known but are simply consistently, reliably themselves. Mrs. Breckett, the librarian, came into the Tim Hortons on Thursday and told Brianna in a loud, warm voice that the young woman who had been helping her on Tuesdays was, quote, the most sensible person who had ever walked through the library door, including herself. Gus Halverson, who said very little, had on the 3rd day that Bennett was present nodded at the counter as Wren moved behind it and said, apropos of nothing, that one's good people. Roger Maitland, when Bennett had come in for the 2nd time with another unnecessary hardware purchase, had said without being asked, "You been eating at Timmy's? Morning girl's sharp. She helped my wife find a legal aid number last spring. Didn't have to do that." But on the 9th day a complication arrived. It arrived in the form of an alert on the prepaid phone from a news aggregator Bennett had not turned off, a single headline from a small political blog that monitored provincial politics. Ashford absence from Queen's Park extends to 6th week. Sources say personal, not political. He read it twice. He walked to the Tim Hortons at 11, the slow hour between the morning rush and the lunch crowd. Wren was wiping down the counter. The shop was empty except for Gus, who appeared to be asleep with his eyes open. He showed her the phone. She read it. She set the phone on the counter. She looked at it for a long moment. She turned it face down. Someone in Marcus's office is talking, she said. Probably not Marcus, one of the assistants. It doesn't say Stillwater. It doesn't say anything specific. Not yet. She was quiet. She was doing what he had watched her do in 4 years of marriage when she was thinking hard. The stillness that looked from the outside like calm, but from the inside he knew, was her running through sequence after sequence. The thing I am doing, she said slowly, requires me to be not connected to you in the public record for the next 7 weeks. The moment someone ties the senator's missing wife to a document being filed in a specific jurisdiction, the filing can be challenged. It won't be, the grounds are very clean, but it will be delayed, and I cannot afford a delay. What are you filing? She looked at him. Sit down, she said, this will take a while. Gus appeared to be still asleep. Wren came around the counter and sat across from Bennett in the far booth. She set her hands flat on the table. Before I tell you, she said, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is the reason I left, and that I could not tell you when it happened, and I could not call you after, and I have not been able to tell you until now, which is the very fact I could not explain to you in the note I left, because explaining it would have been the same as telling you. He waited. My father's business partner, she said, a man called Edwin Stroud. He was my father's partner at the land development company my father ran in the 90s before my father retired. I grew up knowing Edwin Stroud. He was at my university graduation. He was at our wedding. You have met him twice. I remember him. Edwin Stroud has been for the past 9 years using a small numbered company that holds some of my father's old land assets in trust. Assets my father signed over in the dissolution of the partnership, which my father's lawyers handled very badly, to structure a series of payments between himself and 2 municipal officials in the Niagara region. She paused. The payments are not large, that's the design. They are small enough to be unremarkable on their own, but they are connected to 3 planning approvals. My father was technically still listed as a silent interest holder in at the time of the approvals, because the dissolution paperwork was never fully completed. He understood already where this was going. Your father doesn't know, he said. My father does not know. My father is 71 and has macular degeneration and does not follow his old business interests and has never, to my knowledge, known that Stroud kept any of the numbered vehicles active after the dissolution. She looked at her hands. I found out the night before our Ottawa gala 2 years ago. Stroud came to see me at our house while you were at the pre-event reception. Bennett went very still. He came to the house. He let himself in through the side garden door. I was in the kitchen. He sat down at the kitchen table. She did not look away from her hands. He told me that the numbered company's filing history, if examined, would connect my father's name, still listed as a dormant co-holder, to the approval payments. My father would not face criminal liability because he genuinely was not involved. But the story in the press at the beginning of your second term, with your name next to his through marriage, would look like something it was not. Stroud was not asking me to do anything. He was informing me of a situation that existed and allowing me to understand what it meant. He threatened you. He described a reality. He was very calm about it. She looked up then, finally. He told me that the situation would resolve itself, given time, that the company would wind down quietly, that nothing needed to happen. He just needed me to be aware, and he needed me to understand that being aware meant being quiet. She pressed her lips together briefly. He said that since I had married into public life, I must understand that some things resolve better without intervention. He said this in our kitchen in a very pleasant voice, and then he went out through the side door, and I heard his car on the street, and I stood in the kitchen for a while. Wren, why didn't you tell me that night? She met his eyes. Because by the morning I had understood what he actually wanted, she said. He wasn't asking me to be quiet about the existing situation. He was telling me that the existing situation would get worse, that he intended to move more funds through that numbered vehicle, and that because my father's name was on it, even dormantly, even inactively, the liability trail would reach my father, and from my father to me, and from me to you. He was using your father as leverage. He was using my father's name on a piece of dissolution paperwork as a structure through which to launder money safely, because a dead company co-held by a retired old man who is nearly blind and who never opens his mail is the perfect vehicle. And if anyone looked, they would look at my father, and then at me, and then at you, and Stroud would be one holding removed from all of it. She paused. I could not tell you. If I told you, you would have gone to the RCMP or to your own legal team or to someone, and the moment any official inquiry touched that numbered company, Stroud would restructure, destroy the filing trail, and my father's name would be the last thing standing in the paper. The kettle in the kitchenette back at the counter clicked off, though no one had turned it on. A truck moved slowly down Clement Street outside. Gus Halverson turned a page. I left, she said, because the only way to protect my father and protect you was for me to not be connected to you by anything that could be pressured. A senator's wife is a lever. A woman with no address and no phone and no public existence is not a lever. She looked at the table between them. I am a lawyer. I know how to read the filing history of a numbered company. I have spent 19 months using the public record systems in this province, building an affidavit trail that establishes the full pattern of Stroud's use of that vehicle, including the specific approvals, the specific payments, and the specific dates on which those payments moved. I am not naming my father as anything except an uninvolved dormant co-holder. The affidavit will make the structure clear without implicating him, and it will make Stroud's pattern undeniable. She looked up. I have been working on this in the library on Tuesday afternoons for 7 months. Mrs. Breckett thinks I am cataloguing legal journals. You wrote it yourself. I wrote every word myself, on a computer at the library that has no internet history in my name, using public records terminals. She paused. In 7 weeks, I will file it with the Provincial Integrity Commissioner. I have already confirmed through the public process that the filing window is open. The Commissioner's office does not require my name to be public during the preliminary review stage, but I will file as a statutory declarant with standing through my law license. She looked down at her mug. When the filing is complete, Stroud will know. He will know I was the one who filed it. He will not be able to do anything about it because the filing will already be received, and my father's name will be clearly and in detail protected within it. But Bennett was quiet for a long time. But outside on Clement Street, the light had changed. It was properly morning now, a thin winter sun through the clouds. He could see Mrs. Quinnell's car through the Tim Hortons window, parked in front of the bed, and breakfast 3 doors down, and the sign above the pharmacy, and the hardware store with its lights all on, and Corporal's silhouette moving behind the glass door. But you have been doing this, he said carefully, alone, for 19 months, without a lawyer, without any help. But with Mrs. Brackett's library, she said, and with the public records system, which is a remarkable thing if you know how to use it. But Wren. But yes. But why didn't you trust me to help you? But she looked at him for a long time with the expression she had had. The morning she had won her first moot court competition in law school, which he had not been there for but which she had described once, very precisely, the expression of someone who has been right about something difficult and takes no particular pleasure in it. But because you would have made it about you, she said quietly. Not because you are selfish, because you are a senator and it is your job to make things about the public record. You would have gone to your Integrity Council. You would have issued a statement. You would have removed yourself from perceived conflict. All of that would have been correct, and all of it would have handed Stroud exactly the chaos he needed to move the funds one step further and close the company cleanly and leave nothing behind except my father's name on a dissolved entity that nobody could prove meant anything. She paused. The only way this works is if the person filing it is invisible. The moment I am the senator's wife, I am not invisible. I am a story, and Stroud is a man who is very good at using stories. But he understood. But he understood it with the particular cold clarity that comes when someone shows you the inside of a room you have been standing outside of for 19 months. But he set his hands flat on the table. But I owe you an apology, he said. But you don't. But I do. He looked at her. Not for looking for you, I would look for you again, but for building a life in which the only logical thing you could do when something like this happened was to disappear from it. That is mine. I'm sorry. But she was very still for a moment. But Bennett, she said. But yes. But you didn't build a bad life. You built a public one. It's not the same thing. Her voice was even. I chose it with you. I just didn't understand, when we chose it, what it would mean to have nowhere quiet to stand when something quiet needed to be done. She looked at her mug. That's not your fault. That's just what it is. But he pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment. But 8 weeks, he said. But 7 now, she said, 7 weeks. But what do you need me to do? But she looked at him. The early light from the window was on the side of her face, and in it she looked like the woman he had married, and also like a woman he was meeting for the first time, and both of those things were true. But go back, she said. Go back to the city. Go back to Queen's Park. Be visible. Do the work. Let Marcus issue a statement that you've returned for the sitting session. Be photographed at the legislature. Be photographed at your mother's. Take 3 meetings that will get written up in the Hill Times. She paused. Make yourself boring and present and politically legible for the next 7 weeks. Give anyone who is watching you nothing to watch. And on the morning after I file, I will call you, on a real phone, and I will tell you it's done. And then I'll come home. She said it simply, without ornament. If you still want that. Wren. You've had 19 months. I have wanted exactly one thing for 19 months. She looked at him. Something in her face moved. She looked away. Go, she said. Go today. If that blog piece gets picked up before you're back in the city, someone will run the absence story and start making calls. He nodded. He stood up. Wren. Yes. I have been wearing my wedding ring. He said it to the table, not to her face. Every day. I know you'll say that. Don't. Her voice was quiet and not unkind. Please, 7 weeks. All right, he said. I'm sorry. He walked out into the cold. He drove south on the 41 and then east on the 401. He was in his Ottawa office by 2 in the afternoon. Marcus Lyle, his chief of staff, a man who had spent 19 months running Bennett Ashford's office with the calm of someone who had made a private decision that whatever was happening was not his business, stood up from his desk when Bennett walked in and shook his hand and said, "Welcome back," and asked no questions. Bennett gave one careful interview at the legislature in which he said he had taken time for personal reasons and was glad to be back and had nothing further to add on the personal matter. He attended 2 committee meetings. He was photographed at both. He had lunch with a colleague at a restaurant on Elgin Street, where photographers occasionally lingered. He called his mother. He told her he was well and that things were resolving, and that he would explain everything soon. But his mother, who had never once in his memory pressed him for information he wasn't offering, said only that she was glad and that she had saved him a piece of the pie she'd made at Christmas. But he called Marcus at the end of the first week back and asked him to have their legal affairs counsel pull the public filing history on a numbered company. He gave Marcus the file number he had memorized from what Wren had described, through publicly available provincial records only. No private inquiry, no contact with any external firm. But he told Marcus to put whatever was found in a sealed envelope and lock it in the firm's document safe and not discuss it with anyone until Bennett told him to. But Marcus did this without asking why. He had been in politics long enough to understand that some things needed to be held before they could be used. But in the 4th week, a junior reporter from a Toronto political blog called the constituency office and asked to speak to someone about an inquiry he was making regarding numbered real estate vehicles connected to provincial political families. The receptionist took the message, flagged it to Marcus, and Marcus called Bennett at 8 that evening. But Bennett listened. He was quiet. "Don't return the call," he said. "Draft a standard media relations note. Any inquiries about private family business matters are referred to the family's personal counsel. That's all. If they press, the note holds." But Marcus said he understood. But Bennett set the phone down in the kitchen of the Ottawa house. He stood for a moment at the kitchen table. The same kitchen where Stroud had sat on an evening 19 months ago and described a reality in a pleasant voice. He stood there for a moment and then he went to bed. But the reporter did not publish anything. There was nothing to publish. But in the 7th week on a Thursday morning, Bennett's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, a local Ontario area code he couldn't place. "It's done," Wren said. He sat down. "The filing was received," she said, "yesterday at 4:15. The Commissioner's office sent an acknowledgement to the email address I set up for the purpose. The statutory declaration is on file. Stroud will be notified of the preliminary inquiry within 30 days. Her voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has set something very heavy down on a very solid surface. "My father's status in the document is protected in the way I intended. The integrity of the filing is clean." A pause. "It's done." "Wren." "Yes." "Come home." A silence, not long, the length of a full breath in and out. "I'm going to give Mrs. Breckett a week's notice," she said. "I'm going to tell Brianna I'm leaving. I need to return 2 library books, and I need to say goodbye to Gus because Gus will notice if I don't and it will bother him." A pause. "I'll be home by the end of the week." "Do you need me to come?" "No," she said. "I rented the car I need. I have enough for the drive and I want to leave on my own." Another pause. "I want to close the door on my own." "All right." "Bennett." "Yes." "I know what I asked you to give up for 7 weeks. I know what the absence cost you. I know what you said about the bedroom." Her voice dropped slightly. "Thank you for staying." He could not answer that in any way that was equal to it. He held the phone. "Come home, Wren," he said. She came home on a Saturday. She drove into the driveway at just past noon. He heard the car from the kitchen. He did not go out. He waited. He heard the car door. He heard the front steps. He heard the key in the lock. She came into the kitchen in her green parka with a single bag over her shoulder and her short hair still cold from outside and her cheeks red from the weather. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at him. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She set her bag on the chair. She looked at the kitchen table. She looked at the kettle on the counter. She looked at her coat hook on the wall by the door, which was empty because he had told her he'd moved her coat, and which she had brought back from the hall closet at some point in the past 7 weeks without telling him, and which now held her old black winter coat, hanging where it had always hung. She turned and looked at him. "You put it back," she said. "Marcus put it back," he said. "I told him where it was." She looked at the coat for another moment. She looked at him. Something in her face moved in a way he could not name, except that it was relief and grief and the particular tenderness of a person who has been alone for 19 months and is standing in a kitchen that still smells the same. She walked across the kitchen and put her arms around him and stood there. He held her. They stood in the kitchen in the noon light for a long time without speaking. The kettle was not on. The house was quiet. Outside, the Ottawa winter was doing what it did, grey and relentless, the same as it had always been, which was a comfort for once, rather than a weight. She told him everything over the next 3 days. The full version, slower and more detailed than what she had given him in the Tim Hortons booth in Stillwater. She told him about the night Stroud came to the kitchen. She told him about the morning she left the bus to Oshawa, the grocery store manager who hadn't asked twice. She told him about the residence in Barrie, the Tuesday afternoons in the library, the particular quality of silence at the public records terminal at 8 in the morning before Mrs. Breckett arrived. She told him about Gus Halverson, who she had told on her last morning exactly who she was, and who had looked at her for a long moment over his plain bagel and said, "Well, you seem like you needed the work," and gone back to his paper. She told him she had loved him every day. He told her he already knew. He told her he had also had 19 months, and that what he had understood somewhere in those months was that he had spent 4 years of their marriage protecting her from public life and had not spent enough of it making room for her inside it. He did not say it to be absolved. He said it because it was true, and she deserved to hear the true version. She did not tell him it wasn't his fault. She said, "I know. We'll figure out the room together." The Integrity Commissioner's inquiry proceeded over the following months in its own quiet way. Edwin Stroud was not a man who surfaced gracefully. He hired 3 lawyers and issued a statement through one of them which said very little. The numbers in the filing once the Commissioner's office began their preliminary examination told a story that did not require much interpretation. The planning approvals, the payment pattern, the vehicle structure, it was not subtle when laid out in sequence, which was the nature of Wren's filing. It had been designed to be unambiguous by someone who understood exactly how ambiguity was used to protect men like Stroud. Her father's name appeared in the filing in the precise way she had intended, a dormant co-holder who had no knowledge of participation in or benefit from any of the transactions. The Commissioner's office confirmed this in writing within 6 weeks of the preliminary review. Bennett was never named in the inquiry. His legal affairs counsel reviewed the sealed envelope from Marcus, confirmed it contained only public record materials, and shredded it on Bennett's instruction. There was nothing there that required anything further. The story, when it eventually emerged in the press, was about Edwin Stroud and a municipal planning structure in the Niagara region. It did not mention Wren Ashford by name. The statutory declarant's identity was protected under the Commissioner's procedural rules, and it did not mention Bennett Ashford except in a passing reference to an Ashford family connection to the original land company, which was accurate and entirely benign, and which disappeared from the news cycle within a week. A year after she came home, they drove to the Kootenays and stayed at her father's fishing cabin for 10 days. Her father, who knew only that some old business of his had been quietly straightened out by his daughter, made a fire every evening and was very content. On the 3rd evening, after her father had gone to bed, Wren sat on the dock in the dark with her feet over the water. Bennett sat beside her. The lake was very still. The mountains on the far side were a black absence against the stars. Gus sent a card, she said. I know, I put it on the kitchen table. He spelled my name wrong. He spelled it W-R-E-N-N, Bennett said. 2 N's Brianna must have told him. Brianna knows how it's spelled. I think Gus writes what he means to write. She was quiet. The lake moved slightly at the edges. I want to go back sometime, she said, to Stillwater. I want to see the bookshop open. I want to have coffee at the Timmy's and sit in Gus's booth, the real one, not the back one. She paused. I want to take Mrs. Breckett to dinner and tell her what was actually in those files. She'll probably already know, Bennett said. She probably will, Wren agreed. She's sharper than she lets on. He looked at the lake. We can go back any time you want, he said. She reached over and put her hand on his. They sat there for a long time in the dark beside the still water, with the mountains around them and the cabin light behind them and the small sound of the lake at the dock's edge, and it was very quiet, and it was enough. I keep thinking about the moment Wren set that cup down on the counter, not dropped it, set it down with both hands steady the way you set something down when you've decided not to fall apart. I think about that a lot. Not the drama of it, but the steadiness, because that steadiness didn't come from nowhere. It came from 19 months of choosing every single morning to keep going when she had every reason not to. That kind of steadiness isn't something you're born with. It's something you build one difficult day at a time, out of nothing but your own sense of what's right. What I keep coming back to is this. Wren didn't leave because she stopped loving Bennett. She left because she loved him well enough to understand that protecting him meant she couldn't be near him. That's not a small thing. Most of us, when we love someone, want to stay close to that feeling. We want the comfort of proximity. Wren made the harder choice. She stepped away from the very thing she was protecting, so that her presence wouldn't destroy it. That's what I'd call real integrity. Not the kind that's easy to perform in public, but the kind that nobody sees, the kind that operates in a rented room above a pharmacy in a town with one set of traffic lights. And then there's the intelligence of what she actually did. She didn't panic. She didn't hand the problem to someone else. She sat in a women's residence in Barrie and read corporate law at a public library terminal every afternoon until the words made shapes she could work with. She understood that the only tool that would work in her situation was one no one could trace back to her, not her name, not her credentials, not her marriage. So she used her mind quietly and precisely for 19 months, and she built something that held. I find that genuinely humbling, not because it was brilliant, though it was, but because it required her to trust her own thinking in conditions specifically designed to make her doubt it. And the perseverance of it. That's the part that sits with me longest. She didn't have a support system. She didn't have a colleague to cross-check her work. She had a library card and a typewriter she bought at a yard sale, and the kind of bone-deep stubbornness that doesn't announce itself. She kept going through the grocery store in Ottawa, through the laundromat shifts in Barrie, through 19 months of not knowing if it would work, or if Bennett would still be there when it did. What I take from Wren's story is that doing the right thing and doing the hard thing are often the exact same thing, and that the people who manage to do both at once are usually the ones who never get the credit for it. Not publicly, anyway. The Integrity Commissioner's filing didn't name her. The press never knew. The people of Stillwater knew her only as the morning girl at the Tim Hortons, who slipped Gus Halverson his bagel and talked to kids at eye level. That's enough. Sometimes that's more than enough. I think the world runs on people like Wren, people who hold things together in the quiet without asking to be seen doing it. We don't always notice them, but the structures we live inside, the trust we take for granted, the small dignities of ordinary life, a lot of that is being maintained right now by someone sitting at a library terminal or a diner counter or a fire escape stair, doing something careful and unglamorous and completely necessary. I'm glad she came home, I'm glad he waited, and I'm glad most of all that she closed the door on her own.